In 15th century Europe, there was a man, a prince of Wallachia, and he signed his name Vladislaus Dracula. The original meaning of his name was never meant as evil. It was a name of honor that was handed down to him from his father. In his life, he was never called Vlad the Bish or even Vlad the Impaler. At the end of Dracula's most documented reign in 1462, began the largest propaganda smear campaign in history. This smear campaign of his name and actions was begun in order to cover up a malicious scandal instigated by the King of Hungary. Forged documents were manufactured to legitimize the arrest of Vlad Dracula by the Hungarian king, and with this twist of injustice, Dracula spent over 10 years of his life in prison. After Dracula's arrest, propagandist pamphlets, manuscripts, paintings, and even poems versed with song made up by his enemies began spreading their way all over Europe. These writings were full of exaggerated, horrific information that caused many people to believe Dracula was the epitome of evil. Centuries later, this misinterpretation of Dracula's name is then seen in a library book by an Irish novelist, who then uses that distorted name, Dracula, for the title of his horror classic.
If you ask 9 out of 10 people who know anything about the subject will say yes, Vlad was the inspiration for Stoker's novel. He was not.
Recent findings in a chapel in Italy begin a new story about Vlad Dracula. His portrait was found among many distinguished men and women of the 15th century Europe, and in his time, bells were rung in his honor. All of Europe considered him a hero. After 500 years of misinterpreting his name, distorting his actions, and exaggerating horrific information about the Prince of Wallachia, it is long overdue to set the record straight on the man, the myths, and the many misconceptions about Vladislaus Dracula.
The word Dracula, for one thing, does not mean vampire. Its origin is actually quite interesting. The word Draco comes from the Latin Draco, which means the dragon, as Romanian is a Latin-based language. There's a historical significance to the name Dracula, which goes back to the 15th century. In 1431, Vlad, that's Vlad the Impaler's father, was invited to the court of the Holy Roman Emperor, Sigismund, to be inducted into the Order of the Dragon. The Order of the Dragon had been established in 1409 by the emperor and his wife, and its purpose was to bring together the nobles, kings, princes, rulers of Christendom in Central and Eastern Europe, and to align them against the Ottoman Empire, which at that time was encroaching into southeastern Europe and was threatening many of the principalities. So this was a kind of an alliance, if you wish, of Christian knights. And it was thought of sort of in the tradition of the Order of St. George. In fact, the idea of St. George slaying the dragon is the reason behind the use of the term. Now, when Vlad Sr. Went back to Sighisoara, where he was living at the time, he took on the nickname Dracula, the dragon, as an indication of the fact that he had been the recipient of this honor. He had been inducted into this honorable society. So it was never, in its origins, a negative term at all. The term as used by, by Vlad was certainly not a derogatory term. It was positive. Now, when young Vlad the Impaler became voivode of Wallachia, he decided to adopt the name Dracula, but of course he used the diminutive form of it as a son of Dracula, and referred to himself on a number of occasions and in several documents as Vlad Dracula, Vlad the son of Dracula, again used in the sense of the honor of the title.
Out of Dracula's 3 reigns as prince, the first in 1448, and his second reign, the most documented between the years of 1456 to 1462, he signed his name Vlad Voivode. Voivode was a Slavic term for prince. Documents in 1475, a year before taking the throne for the last time, and even during his last reign in 1476, show he began signing his name as Vladislaus Dracula. All surrounding kingdoms who wrote to him or wrote about him referred to him as Vlad Voivode, or Prince Vlad Dracula.
It's a rather curious thing about Vlad, and the fact that these 2 names are associated with him. Dracula, the one that he borrowed from his father, the son of the dragon, and also the name Tsepesh, the impaler. Now, the Tsepesh was a nickname that was put on him by the Turks.
In Vlad's lifetime, he was never called Vlad Tsepesh, and he never used this title for himself. After the events in 1462, Turkish chronicles began calling him Kazakula Bey, the impaling prince. But this nickname by the Turks would not be seen until years after Vlad's death.
Now, of course, the Turks were his enemies. And the impaler, was, you could argue, it's strange that that name should be associated with Vlad, because it's almost like an insult being thrown at him by his enemies. But yet that's the name that stuck in Romanian history. And even today, I would suspect you will find more Romanians who would use Tsepesh than Dracula.
The first document that refers to Vlad Dracula as Vlad Tsepesh didn't appear until the year 1550.
So it was not a term that Vlad used himself, which is another reason why one could wonder, well, why do so many historians use it?
Wallachia was a land that changed princes many times, and the average reign of a prince was under 2 years. Since this changing of the throne occurred so often in Wallachia, the people of this country, as well as the surrounding kingdoms, did not take seriously the rules of any new prince. If they did not like the rules of the current prince, they could wait for another prince to take the throne, or they could help dethrone a prince using force or guile. Vladislaus Dracula would prove to be a strong-willed prince who would enforce many rules, restore his country's economy, and defend his country with everything he had.
There have been many discussions about how cruel Vlad was. Oh, he was this, he was that, he was something else. And I don't think anyone could deny but that he was cruel in some of his punishments. I mean, he was not a gentle man. If he'd been a gentle man, he wouldn't have lasted a week as leader of his country.
Vladislaus Dracula began his most famous and most documented reign in 1456. This is where we find the most errors in his history. There was a strong central need for leadership in his lands. If you did not show force, you were seen as weak and could easily be subdued. If you did not show justice, no one would abide by the laws. In a powerful letter he wrote to Brashov in 1456, he stated,
"You must consider this yourselves. When a man or lord is powerful and strong, he may make peace as he will. But when he is weak, a stronger one shall come upon him and do as he wills to him."
This letter goes on as Vlad asked Brashov to keep their former agreements of brotherhood and peace. He tells him that the Turks are in Wallachia and they intend to put on him great burdens, which are not only tributes of money, but also a tribute of 500 Wallachian children. The Turks would gain grounds in Wallachia so they could easily raid the Hungarian lands of Transylvania. Vlad tells Brashov that he would not break the peace with them willingly. He goes on to state that he has detained the Turkish ambassadors that have come for the tributes, until Brashov could send some men to show that they are united against the Turks. Brashov ignores the request for assistance and forces Vlad to pay tributes to the Sultan. Since there are no records of the Turks invading Transylvania, we can assume Vlad talked the Turks out of plundering the Hungarian-ruled cities. In 1459, Pope Piccolomini Pius held a conference at Mantua in order to gather all European forces in a united front against the Ottoman Empire. Many kingdoms sent representatives to this crusading effort, including Vlad Dracula. This gathering of forces was finally what the Principality of Wallachia had desperately needed in order to rid the suzerainty under the Ottoman Empire. Vlad thought the time would finally arrive and he would have help getting rid of the Ottoman Empire for good. Representatives from the Congress had sent word that the Hungarians were in need of help first. Vlad was of the Orthodox religion and technically was not able to receive the funds directly from the Pope. So this Congress decided that they would raise money and give it to the Hungarian king, who was of the Catholic religion. But as we shall see, the Hungarian king had other plans for the crusading funds, and he had plans that directly involved Vladislaus Dracula. In April of 1459, Dan III, another pretender to the throne, was stirring up problems for the prince. Dan III was the brother of Vladislav II, the prince that Vlad dethroned and killed to take the throne in 1456. But Vladislav II was not free of any crimes, because Vladislav, and even perhaps his brother Dan, had started the hostilities when they beheaded Vlad's father and participated in the torture and burying alive of Vlad's older brother, Mircea. The information that Dan wrote to the counselors of Brasov would later be found in the slanderous manuscripts and pamphlets written about Vlad Dracula. But this information would be changed and exaggerated. Dan first claims that Prince Vlad was siding with the Turks, but at this time in 1459, Vlad stopped his payments to the tribute of the Sultan. This is confirmed by many Romanian, Greek, and Turkish chronicles. Dan's letter continues that Vlad had secretly recalled his men who were in Brasov before Vlad made his reign against Brasov merchants and German Saxons. This statement has been easily thrown to the side by historians, but it clearly shows that Vlad Dracula cared for his people and had wanted to keep them safe from harm. Lastly, in Dan III's letter, he calls himself the Prince of Wallachia while Vlad still had the throne. Brasov had a mock ceremony of crowning Dan III as Prince of Wallachia in a church called St. Jacob. This German Saxon church would later be burned to the ground in another one of Vlad Dracula's raids. Dan III was also raiding the merchants of Wallachia and taking their money to support himself and his army for about a year. Vlad would be forced to take action against Dan and his army. In 1460, there began many reports from Venetian ambassadors that were stationed in Buda. On November 27th and also on December 5th, an ambassador named Tomasis informed the Senate that preparations were being made for a crusade. This crusade was to be led by the Hungarian king with aid from Venetians and Papal forces against the Ottoman Turks. This crusade was to be initiated in the year 1462. In 1461, Vlad began having troubles with his cousin, Stefan Salmar, who ruled Moldavia. In 1457, a year after Vlad had taken the Wallachian throne, Vlad had helped rally supporters for his cousin Stefan and even sent 6,000 Wallachian troops to help his cousin gain the throne of Moldavia. Now, after 4 years, Stefan was asking his cousin to give up an important port, the port of Kilia on the Danube. This was a major trade route and much money came from this port. Ambassadors were sent out to try and resolve the hostilities between Stefan and Vlad, but they would prove to be in vain when Stefan decided to ally himself with the Turks and take Kilia at a time Vlad needed help the most.
First, I must to say you that the Romanian lands, the Romanian principalities, Wallachia and Moldavia, have the same surface as the Kingdom of England. You must understand this. It's not a little principality far east. No. It's a great principality. Yes. The two principalities are the same surface. And the revenue of the princes of Moldavia and Wallachia, because the trade of the Danube and the Black Sea,
yes,
it's a so-called the Romanian road from Black Sea to Central Europe and from Black Sea to Baltic Sea by the territory of Moldavia.
okay,
And because this, the revenue from taxes from trade of the two princes are superior than the revenues of the Sultan of Turkish Sultan.
The Sultan had not received his tributes from Vlad in over 3 years. In November of 1461, the Sultan sent 2 ambassadors, Hamza Beg and Catavalonius. These 2 ambassadors were to make Vlad pay the unpaid 3-year tributes and either trick Vlad into coming into the Sultan's court, or if they could not get Vlad to come willingly, they were ordered to capture him by whatever means necessary.
This is a war report about the facts, about the events of the November, December 61,
Yes.
and January, beginning of February
That's the letter
62.
that says February
This is an attack against, and we have these attacks. It's very important concerning these attacks. You have the letter.
I have the letter.
The
Yes.
the letter is very important.
Because what he did was he burned those posts that Mehmed could not cross. And so
Mehmed
he-
was in this time. Mehmed was on the way returning from Trebizond.
This letter was to the Hungarian king, Matthias Corvinus, dated February 11th, 1462. It reads,
By the grace of God, we found out about their trickery, and it was us who captured the Hamza Beg in the lands of the Turks, near the fortress of Giurgiu. The Turks opened the gates of the fortress. Then at the shouts of our men, mixing with theirs, we entered the fortress and conquered it.
They conquered Trebizond, and in the same time, Mehmed II prepared the war on the Danube against Vlad the Impaler. And he was obliged to fight. It is not true that he attacked the Turkish Empire. He was attacked and he was obliged to the war. This is the truth. It's another story than they say.
Yes.
He didn't attack the Turks. He was attacked
Yes.
from Serbia.
Vlad continues in his letter to the Hungarian king,
Your Majesty should know that we have done all we could for the time being. Seeing what we had done, the Turks left their quarrels and fights they had in other places, including the country and holy crown of your Majesty.
We need to put this in a bit of a context. This was only a few years after the fall of Constantinople at the hands of the Ottomans. I mean, the Ottomans were a very, very powerful empire. And the idea of Vlad, the leader in a small, relatively speaking, a small principality, declaring war against the Ottoman Empire, it's like David going up against Goliath. It's quite amazing. Why would he do so? I mean, what chance would he have of overcoming such a mighty army? Well, part of the answer to that might be that he had expected to get more help.
As early as 1460, Venetian ambassadors had spread word that a crusade was to begin in 1462. They stated that Matthias was gathering an army in Transylvania. Vlad asked the king,
If it is truly your desire to fight against them, now is the time. But if you are not coming, then please send an army of your Majesty to the Transylvanian lands by St. George's Day, April 23rd. If you do not wish to assist, please tell us truly the thoughts of your Majesty.
There'd been some talk about a new crusade against the Ottoman Empire, and that this had the support of some leading figures in Western Europe, and that if Vlad were to sort of prepare the way, so to speak, when the time came, he might get a lot of help. And I think that he probably expected that. And when the time came, of course he didn't. He was on his own, which often happened with him.
When weather permits, they will come in the spring with all their power, but they will have no crossing points because we have burned them.
Another are on the Danube in Bulgaria. Then after he delivered the region of